and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Dewan Rakyat Speaker has recently suggested publicly naming MPs who are absent during parliamentary sessions. And this, as he says, is a way to curb absenteeism by MPs. Now, some of the questions that we need to consider in the show tonight is, why are MPs absent during parliamentary sessions? Should the front, back and opposition benches be filled at all times? And are there deeper issues with the way our parliamentary sessions are structured that we need to look at? So joining me on the show to explore this topic further is Maha Balakrishnan. She's a Parliamentary and Institutional Development Specialist, as well as Rajiv Rishyakaran, who is the Assemblyperson for Bukit, Selangor. Welcome both of you to the show. Good
Thank
of
you for having us.
To join me today on a Friday evening. I want to begin with you, Rajiv, and ask you why you're passionate about this topic, and if you think this suggestion by the Speaker of publicly naming MPs who are not in the Dewan during the sessions, will that be an effective strategy to get them to attend? And not just attend, but to engage actively.
All right, thank you so much. I think that's quite a difficult question on whether we should accept this suggestion. I personally have no problem. I have no problem letting my constituents know when I'm in the chamber and when I'm not in the chamber, and the work that I do. In fact, a lot of us, most of us, share with our constituents our work. When we do work, be it meeting government agencies, site visits, negotiating between different groups of residents, we tend to share this work as politicians because that's what people want to see us doing. So I don't think most of us shy away from that. Attendance in the chamber is one metrics of our work, but a lot more is done in the course of our day-to-day activities. So meeting with various government departments to resolve issues that our constituents face, meeting various agencies to create new initiatives for the people. So all of this takes time, and many of these meetings may happen outside the chamber.
So just to interject here, the crux of the matter is we've seen all those pictures of half-empty halls, of empty seats, of ministers falling asleep in the seats or on their phones. Yes. So that I think the optics of that seem to suggest that either you're not in the hall and you're not working, or you're in the hall and you're not working. Yeah. So how maybe Maha, I can come to you, and maybe you can give us an overview of the current format of Dewan Rakyat and whether that contributes to a lack of participation and engagement by MPs.
Well, I think there are a number of factors at play here. Obviously, with some MPs, it's clearly, when they're not present in Parliament, it's clearly a case of absenteeism or even truancy, if we want to use that term.
Like ponting, is it? With no good reason, okay.
However, I do think that perhaps many people may not realize that the Dewan Rakyat especially has become a very, very busy place. So oftentimes there are parallel proceedings happening in different rooms at the same time. Yeah. And I think people are not aware of this or don't realize this. So ever since we instituted a parliamentary committee system, and ever since we started the Kamahas, the special chamber, which now I think is being used even more actively and more frequently, what commonly happens is that MPs will fix committee meetings during parliamentary meetings because it's the easiest time to get everyone together. There are some structural issues with that. So, for example, committees aren't allowed to meet outside of Parliament. Committees aren't allowed to have hybrid or virtual meetings. And because of all these restrictions, when Parliament is sitting, when a parliamentary meeting is happening, committees take advantage of that and also have their meetings and have their engagements with different stakeholders, right? So parliamentary committee meetings are also happening at the same time as parliamentary sittings. That's number one. And number two, the special chamber is a fascinating space. The special chamber in the Dewan Rakyat convenes every afternoon from 2:30 onwards. And certain MPs, smaller groups of MPs and ministers or deputy ministers will gather and discuss issues. So that too is happening at the same time. And of course, having said all of that, one of the main structural issues, which I'm sure we'll come to soon, I'm sure YB Rajiv has his position on this, is despite all of that, despite how active the Parliament is and how many different proceedings are happening at the same time, we are still not sitting as often and as frequently as we should. And I think that's perhaps our main problem. The main problem with the Dewan Rakyat is that it only sits on average 70 days a year, well below what we find in other parliaments. And we're not fully utilizing the time that Parliament could spend discussing bills, debating issues of national interest, and more importantly, we're not incentivizing opposition MPs and backbencher MPs to come to Parliament, because if Parliament sits for longer, there will be longer times allocated for debates, which means MPs get to speak longer, more MPs get to debate, which will encourage them to turn up. And more importantly, if Parliament sits longer, then perhaps we can actually even introduce proceedings like private members' time, opposition time, backbenchers' time, which would encourage opposition MPs and backbenchers to be in the House and to participate.
Okay, so I mean, fascinating things that you've mentioned. I want to know, Rajiv, when Maha says that we're not fully using the time, that the limited time that we're already having for parliamentary sessions, what do you think we should be doing then to maximize the use of the time?
So, a lot of time spent in the main chamber is debating as a whole house. For example, the budget. The budget takes about 6 weeks, 5 to 6 weeks to go through from the first speech by the finance minister, the prime minister, all the way until it's finally approved in full. That 5 weeks to 6 weeks is done by the whole 222 members in the whole house. And because it's done in that way, it's a very long, drawn-out session. And MPs don't get that much time to talk anyway. First-term MPs will probably get 20 minutes to give their speech. But if you start piling up everyone's 20 minutes, it becomes very, very long. So you spend the first 2 weeks where every MP delivers their 20, 30 minutes of budget speech. During this process, it's when you will see the parliament being relatively empty, because someone in Kemaman may not necessarily find what's happening in Melaka relevant, and someone in KL may not find what's happening in Sabah relevant. MPs are bringing up everything under the sun. They're not specifically debating one issue by one issue, but it's a very open-ended debate.
Right, because you've only got 20 minutes.
You've
so
got
you
20
say
minutes, anything under the sun. And then 1 week of the ministers replying all this, everything and anything under the sun. Okay. And so then MPs would pay attention. Like, I raised issues related to the Minister of Transport. So when he's speaking, I'll make sure I'm in the chamber to listen to what he has to reply to the issue I raised. But when the Agriculture Minister is speaking and I didn't raise anything to do with the Agriculture Minister, then I may choose to use my time outside the chamber to do something else rather than spend a couple of hours in the chamber listening to him. Right. So this is the challenge. It's not very efficient. Whereas a lot of countries put this fine details of debating into committees. And when you debate this in committees, then a smaller group of people deep dive into these matters and actually scrutinize it, and then that's what I feel will be so much more productive, rather than all 222 MPs debating everything under the sun, making it going all over the place and dragging out time tremendously. So is that
the fault of the MPs for
not
being focused about the budget? So you're supposed to focus on
the budget is big. The budget covers all ministries in the federal government. There is not an issue of not being focused. Pretty much everything to do with government has got to do with the budget,
right.
To be fair. to them. And different MPs raise up different issues based on their focus areas. It could be their passions. It could be issues related to their constituency. Not every MP can cover all ministries. Can you imagine every MP would like to speak on 10 minutes on every ministry, then that 20 minutes will become 2 hours, and if you add that all up, the budget debate will take a few months to circle around the House.
Right.
So we need to do things a bit more structurally. Look, I mean, UK Parliament puts the budget through the main chamber for about 4 days rather than 6 weeks. But it goes through very big scrutiny at committee level, and that's something that could make Parliament a lot more productive. And so then the time in the main chamber, now we talk about 70 days a year, let's say if we don't raise that, I mean, I would love to see that raised, but let's say until we get there where it's raised, let's have the 70 days being used more productively, and let's have a lot of details being debated at committee level. So I wouldn't say this is anyone's fault per se. I mean, this is just the legacy. This is how things have been running from independence until now. But I think it's time we start talking about it and start moving towards changing how Parliament works.
Maha, can I get your thoughts on that? Do you think the structure of having to listen to all 222 MPs, is that inefficient, or are there reasons for the fact that you're allowing everyone that time to speak?
Well, first of all, I don't think everyone necessarily gets time for every debate. I think that's one thing to bear in mind.
Budget.
The budget,
yes,
and
for
the budget,
Agong's
for the
opening
Agong's
address.
speech, yes. But
so these
otherwise,
2 debates a year.
yes. Otherwise,
And they
there's
take a
bit
long
of
time.
These two are the
competition.
ones that takes a long time.
Now, they take a long time, but I completely agree with YB Rajiv. The fact of the matter is this: every MP is both a politician as well as a representative of his constituency, and also has specific areas of policy which interest them, right? And so they use Parliament for all these different purposes, right? So as a politician, you want the time in front of the camera when the camera is on you. That's important. As a politician and a representative of your constituency, you want to get answers from the minister concerned. Now, if the only space that you're able to do that is the plenary, then you're fighting for that space.
Right.
But once you create a situation, a different chamber, the Kamahas, or if you enable committees to scrutinize bills, enable committees to scrutinize the estimates of the budget, right, then that becomes the platform where the MPs can achieve all these different interests, all these different priorities that they have. And I completely agree. I do think that moving legislative bills into committee is the way forward for Malaysia. It's already happening across the world. We are far behind on this because the committees will achieve two purposes. One is it will become more efficient, the making of laws will become more efficient, and it will also become more effective. More efficient because what it then means is that you can run a number of different bills through Parliament at the same time because they get fielded off to different committees for the detailed review, right, before coming back to the main house. And more effective because committees get to take evidence. So it's not just MPs posing questions to ministers which the minister may or may not answer. It is actually MPs sitting together in committee, calling in evidence, calling in expertise, and coming up with reasoned findings and reasoned recommendations for improving a bill. So all in all, a much better, more effective and more efficient way of passing laws.
Okay, so this is also part of the strengthening of the PSCs that we've seen happen recently in Parliament. Okay, I want to explore the different hats that an MP wears, because I think this is also where you could come in, Rajiv, because constituency priorities have to go hand in hand with lawmaking and activism of the things that they're passionate about. How does, so in terms of weightage, that takes up a lot of time for MPs to get constituent issues sorted. What do you think voters expect from MPs in terms of constituency work?
I don't think there's any one single answer. because different groups of voters expect different things. There are many voters that expect you to show up at funerals and weddings.
Yes.
And whatever you do in Parliament is really irrelevant to them. There are many constituents that expect you to solve problems that they bring to your attention. It could be small problems from potholes to street lights not working, or larger problems like citizenship or entrance to schools, police reports that were made that were not investigated. So there's a lot of issues that come through our offices from the residents. We deal with hundreds of issues at any one moment. I think my office right now deals with about 400 live cases, and every week as you close some, as you resolve some, you get more, because it's just the world is alive and things keep happening. So we spend a lot of effort resolving issues, and that's resolving issues means talking to government agencies. It means talking to ministers, state exco members. It depends on which issue and what is needed, and there's no one simple prescription, because most issues are unique in their own way. Run-of-the-mill things are generally not an issue. The government agencies have SOPs and things are resolved. It's the things which are not run-of-the-mill, where there are no standard SOPs that come to us and take up our time. So that's important. Lawmaking is important. Whenever a minister puts a bill, or an exco member in the State Assembly puts a bill on the table, you want to debate it, and you want to ensure that it's the best possible version of the law that it could be.
What is it like at the state legislative level?
It's lesser in terms of days, it's lesser in terms of jurisdictions, but it's similar in terms of how things function. So it's actually very similar.
Is it as
yes.
unproductive?
Yes, it is.
It could be more productive.
It could be more productive.
It could be more efficient.
It could be, but it's also the same. Like, for example, we are currently in the middle of the budget debate that's happening this week and next week at the State Assembly. Just like Parliament, we went through all aduns having between 40 minutes to the last speaker 5 minutes to speak on a variety of issues that they want to raise. Everyone wants to raise a different issue, balancing what your constituents need as well as what your personal passions are when it comes to policy making. So in fact, when we had to extend the time of the sitting, so Parliament also constantly sits into the night, State Assembly also does the same into the late evening, not so much as late as Parliament. However, you struggle to keep quorum. You need to tell everyone, stay and listen to each other, because when you were speaking, others stayed to listen to keep the quorum, and now when others are speaking, you stay to keep the quorum. We have 56 people, so it's not as difficult a task as 222 people in Parliament, but overall, it's more or less the same principles at play here, and the same challenges when it comes to effectiveness.
So if we were thinking about reform, it would be also at state and at
definitely
national level, at Dewan Rakyat level. Okay,
correct. Both.
But before I get into the feasibility of reform, I wanted to follow up with Maha, that same question. As a parliamentary and institutional development specialist, if you think about the platonic ideal of an MP, if I may use that, how would you describe his or her role?
The role changes. There is no one role that an MP plays in a day, let alone throughout his or her career or in one particular parliamentary cycle. Simply because, especially in a party-based political system, right? You have the added element that an MP or an adun is not only a representative of their constituents, they are also a member of a political party, and all that comes with that, with the party discipline and the party priorities and the party dynamics that come with that, which impacts their work in the House, which impacts what they can and cannot say in the House, how they must vote or not vote. And an MP and adun is also a member of that legislative body. And that responsibility is huge, And perhaps not a lot of MPs prioritize that part of their role. So I think there are different roles that they play, and we shouldn't pigeonhole an MP in a particular way. What we can try to design is reforms that allow MPs to fulfill all these different roles as effectively and efficiently as possible. So I think that's really the route that the Dewan Rakyat is actually heading towards. I have to say that there have been a lot of reforms over the last few years, especially since November 2022, which are all very encouraging.
What
but
makes
more
you say
needs
that?
to be done.
Can you
the
elaborate?
committee system in the Dewan Rakyat has really taken off. The committees, by and large, are far more active than previous iterations of committees that we've seen. They have a better understanding of their powers. They've been given a much better remit and mandate than ever before. They have better resources, but they need more. What they really do need are certain stronger powers and definitely more time. More time, and even something as simple as infrastructure. Sometimes I have been in situations where committees are struggling to set up a meeting simply because there isn't enough room in Parliament.
Wow.
I know, so can you imagine the loss?
Wow.
Right? So it's these things, and of course what I mentioned before, you know, we can modernize the rules to allow for hybrid meetings, because really that would open up so much more time and opportunity for committees to meet. So that's one aspect. And the second aspect, of course, is, as I said, the ability for MPs and ministers to debate outside the plenary in things like the Kamahas, right? So that's also very positive. But again, more needs to be done. I think what we haven't yet seen is concretization of all these changes into the rules, into the standing orders, to make sure that they become permanent.
Right. So right now it's just kind of by practice that they're
By practice, and really at the discretion of the current government.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Rajiv, a large part of this is also to do with educating the public, because I think that there is dissatisfaction stemming from the photos of empty halls, or the sight of all these empty seats when one MP is speaking.
Yes.
What would you like the public to better understand about this issue? So the next time we see this, we're not automatically thinking somebody's punting Parliament today.
Well, I think first of all we need to give a lot more attention to what happens in these other meeting rooms.
Okay.
Media coverage of what happens in select committee meetings and what happens in the second chamber is actually very small. Very, very little. If you scan through normal traditional media, newspapers, TV, or even if you look at the online portals, which are supposedly more progressive, there's actually very, very little coverage of what happens there, and that's something that can help shift the public's mindset to what happens in Parliament if the media starts to give a bit more attention to what the select committee does. I think we also need to evolve a bit in making all the select committees live telecasted.
We can't. It's not live telecasted.
Not at this point.
Not at this point.
There's a huge debate about whether the committees can meet in open hearings or not.
So it's not live telecasted. That would help, but people are not going to go on YouTube and watch the live telecast if they don't even have the knowledge that such a thing exists. And maybe the first step is to have some media coverage of what they do, because every major news agency has an army in Parliament. Yes, and they always focus on the main chamber and what happens there. It would also be helpful if they could give some coverage to what happens in the other rooms in Parliament, and get comments from chairmen of committees as to what's happening in their respective committees and cover the stories. Now, in, let's say, UK and America, it's not uncommon for newspaper headlines to be about things that happen in committee. So it's not something that's buried in the 10 page. It's not something so small. Media coverage is important, because if the committee is debating, let's say, sugar tax, when the health committee in UK was debating sugar tax, it was all over the front pages of British newspapers.
So quick one, Maha, last minute or so that we have left. What would you like to see institutionalized, as you said, and how feasible are these reforms?
I would like to see with committees that the committees be given the discretion whether to hold public hearings or not. Give them the discretion, allow them the ability to hold public hearings. It would make a huge difference. I would also like to see longer sitting times. I think that's going to be really helpful. And I think the third thing we should try and put into place is opposition time or private members' time, which will allow motions and maybe perhaps even bills brought by backbenchers and opposition members to be discussed in Parliament.
Both of you, a riveting conversation. Thank you so much
You're
for
most
joining me
welcome.
on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.